Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Manga Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. David adjusted his tie, the fabric smooth beneath his fingers, as he glanced at the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was steady, but the storm inside raged. Tonight, Laura had another work event. She had mentioned it with the same practiced indifference she had for months now. Her smile too perfect, her explanation too rehearsed. He stepped into the quiet evening air, his thoughts replaying the subtle shifts in their life. The late-night texts, the weekends when she claimed to be swamped with deadlines, and her newfound passion for dressing up for casual meetings. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but the small inconsistencies began to stack, forming a picture he could no longer ignore. Sliding into his car, he opened the tracking app he'd installed on her phone a week ago, a quiet insurance policy against the gnawing suspicion. The small blue dot moved through the city, stopping at a trendy downtown bar, not the office she'd named earlier. Tagged his attention. All that registered was his peripheral vision. More than that, his jaw tightened. The address was familiar. It was where they'd celebrated their anniversary 2 years ago. The irony was almost cruel. He parked a block away, opting to walk the last stretch. The night air felt heavy as he approached the glass-fronted establishment. Inside, laughter and conversation hummed like a backdrop to his thoughts. Through the window, he spotted her immediately, sitting in a booth near the back, her auburn hair glowing under the soft amber light. Next to her was Chris, her colleague, the one who had always seemed too charming for comfort. David's heart pounded as he watched Chris lean in, his hand brushing Laura's. She laughed, her head tilted in a way that once was meant for him. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, but David remained rooted to the spot. He knew he could march in, confront her in a scene that would be as public as it was devastating. But as the seconds ticked by, his anger hardened into something colder, sharper. A plan. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture through the window. Laura's hand was now resting on Chris's arm, her wedding ring catching the light as she gestured animatedly. The image would be undeniable, a stark contrast to the version of Laura she presented at home. David turned on his heel and walked back to his car. He didn't need to stay any longer. Tonight wasn't about confrontation, it was about clarity. The evidence he gathered wouldn't just serve as proof. It would be the first move in a methodical unraveling of Laura's double life. As he drove home, David's mind churned with calculations and contingencies. Laura's facade would crumble, but it wouldn't be because of an impulsive outburst. When her lies came to light, they would be undeniable, their impact inescapable. And in the silence of their aftermath, he would be free. David couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the weight of Laura's betrayal pressed down on him. Next to him, she slept peacefully, her breathing slow and even, as if nothing in her world was amiss. The sight only deepened his resolve. When dawn broke, David was already up, seated at the kitchen table with a notebook and his laptop. His plan was taking shape, and he knew that timing would be everything. A single misstep could turn the tables against him, leaving him exposed or painted as the villain. No, he needed this to be flawless, methodical, and final. His first step was to document everything. He downloaded the photos from his phone, zooming in on Laura and Chris at the bar. The laughter on her face looked like a mockery of their life together. Next, he logged into their shared phone plan account and retrieved her call logs and text message summaries. The frequency of Chris's number appearing was damning, a silent confirmation of his suspicions. David created a folder labeled Project Revelation and began organizing the evidence. He knew it wasn't just about catching Laura in the act. It was about building an irrefutable case that exposed her duplicity to everyone who mattered. Her family, their mutual friends, even her boss. None of them would be able to deny the truth. But there was more to consider. Laura's actions didn't exist in a vacuum. They had ripple effects. David thought about their finances, their home, and the years they had shared. He wasn't just dealing with a personal betrayal. This was an attack on the life they'd built together. To protect himself, he needed allies. His first call was to Emma, his sister. Over coffee that afternoon, he shared only enough to enlist her support, showing her the photos and explaining Laura's frequent absences. "She's been lying to me, Em," he said, his voice even but heavy with emotion. "I need to make sure I handle this the right way." Emma's eyes narrowed as she studied the evidence. "Whatever you need, I'm here. Just tell me what to do." With Emma in his corner, David began laying the groundwork for what came next. He contacted a private investigator to dig deeper into Chris's background. Was this a pattern for him? Did he have anything to lose from the fallout? Information was power, and David intended to have as much of it as possible. Meanwhile, he set up a meeting with Karen, a mutual friend who had unknowingly corroborated Laura's lies in the past. Over lunch, David gently guided the conversation toward Laura's recent behavior. "Do you remember that work event Laura had a few weeks ago?" he asked casually. Karen nodded. "Oh, yeah. She mentioned it when we were at yoga." David leaned in. "Did she say who organized it?" Karen frowned. "I think she said it was her boss." "Why?" David smiled tightly. "Just curious. Thanks for clearing that up." "Ah, sweet thingy." David frozen, bigger still. "Thank you. I'm sorry this fell." Her unwitting confirmation of Laura's deceit was another piece of the puzzle. Slowly but surely, David was building a web of evidence that would leave no room for doubt. By the end of the week, David's file had grown substantially. There were screenshots of Laura's location history, text summaries that hinted at hidden plans, and photos that painted a clear picture of her relationship with Chris. He'd even managed to capture a video clip from outside the bar, showing them leaving together in a way that left little to the imagination. But David wasn't done. He reached out to Sophia, Laura's boss, under the guise of discussing an unrelated matter. He knew that if Laura's personal indiscretion spilled into her professional life, the consequences would ripple further than she ever anticipated. Throughout it all, David kept his emotions in check. He knew that anger, while justified, would only cloud his judgment. Every action he took was deliberate, aimed at ensuring that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable and devastating. As he reviewed his progress late one night, a thought struck him. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, but the realization that the woman he loved had become a stranger. It wasn't just Laura's lies that hurt. It was the loss of the life he thought they had. David closed his laptop and sat in the silence of the room. The storm he was unleashing wasn't just for revenge. It was a reckoning, a chance to reclaim his life from the lies that had entangled it. And when it was over, there would be no going back. David awoke before dawn, the weight of Laura's betrayal pressing down on him like an iron shroud. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of the trees outside. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows dancing across the wall. This was no longer just a suspicion. It was a puzzle he had started solving, and each piece he uncovered revealed a picture far darker than he had expected. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains as David retreated to his study, the small sanctuary where he now plotted his next steps. His laptop glowed in the dim room, and the folder labeled Evidence waited for him on the desktop. Each click opened another file. Photos, text logs, screenshots of locations, all meticulously gathered over the past week. This wasn't about revenge, at least that's what he told himself. This was about clarity, about ensuring that when the truth came to light, there would be no room for Laura to twist the narrative. He remembered her laugh from the night before, the way she had leaned into Chris, her hand brushing his. It was a laugh that once belonged to their happiest moments, now distorted into a cruel echo of their past. David knew he needed to be meticulous. Reckless actions could backfire, and he couldn't afford mistakes. His first step was to expand his reach beyond his own observations. A private investigator, one who specialized in uncovering affairs, was hired to track Chris's movements. Was Chris a serial cheater? Did he have other skeletons in his closet that could be leveraged? While waiting for updates, David shifted his focus to their shared financial accounts. If Laura was spending money on Chris, he needed to document it. As he combed through statements, his fingers paused over charges for lavish dinners, boutique hotel stays, and unexplained expenses that had once seemed innocuous. A pattern began to emerge, each transaction a thread in the tapestry of betrayal. He made careful notes, adding these findings to his growing file. His next move required subtlety. Over coffee with Karen, a mutual friend, he casually brought up Laura's work. "Laura's been swamped lately," David said, stirring his cup. "I feel like I barely see her anymore." Karen nodded, sympathy in her eyes. "She's been mentioning all those late meetings. I don't know how she keeps up." David tilted his head. "Late meetings?" Karen hesitated before adding, "Yeah, she mentioned Chris a lot. Said they'd been working closely on some big project." David's stomach churned, but he kept his expression neutral. Of course. She's always been so dedicated." He frowned. Karen's unwitting confirmation added another brick to the wall he was building, one that would ensure Laura's lies couldn't stand under scrutiny. But David wasn't finished. He set up a casual lunch with Sophia, Laura's boss, under the pretense of discussing a potential charity partnership for his company. Throughout the meeting, he probed delicately, gauging Sophia's awareness of Laura's extracurricular activities. When the conversation veered toward Laura's work ethic, Sophia seemed hesitant. "She's been different lately," Sophia admitted after a pause. "I've noticed some inconsistencies, but nothing I can pin down. As my sister Erin Treggs put it, she couldn't help but feel like something was missing." Flynn said nothing. David nodded thoughtfully, storing the information for later use. If Laura's actions had started to bleed into her professional life, it could serve as another powerful leverage point. Back at home, David took stock of his progress. The evidence was piling up, but it wasn't just about quantity. It was about precision. He needed the truth to hit with the force of a hammer, shattering every excuse and leaving no doubt about the depth of her betrayal. He had begun cataloging their interactions, recording Laura's vague explanations and moments when her stories didn't align. Each contradiction was another nail in the coffin of her deceit. Despite his focus, David couldn't ignore the ache in his chest. Laura wasn't just cheating. She was destroying the foundation of the life they had built together. He thought about the laughter they had shared, the plans they had made. Was any of it real, or had it all been a lie? As the days passed, David found himself scrutinizing every detail. He replayed conversations, dissected her mannerisms, and studied the moments when she seemed too eager or too indifferent. The woman he thought he knew was slipping away, replaced by a stranger who had perfected the art of deception. Late one night, he sat alone in the darkened living room, the glow of his laptop casting shadows on the walls. The photos of Laura and Chris stared back at him, stark reminders of the betrayal he couldn't escape. But as he closed the folder, a new resolve filled him. This wasn't just about exposing her lies. It was about reclaiming his life, about ensuring that when he walked away, he did so with his dignity intact. David exhaled deeply and shut the laptop. The storm was gathering, and when it broke, it would leave no survivors. David stood at the edge of the hotel conference room, his face a mask of calm as he scanned the crowd. Friends, colleagues, and family members mingled, laughing and sharing stories over the soft hum of music and clinking glasses. This gathering wasn't his idea. It was Laura's. She had insisted on hosting a celebration of achievements, a way to showcase their partnership and their supposedly thriving life. For David, the timing was perfect. He had everything he needed. He had spent weeks piecing together the puzzle of Laura's betrayal. There were no doubts left, no lingering questions. Her relationship with Chris was far more than a fleeting indiscretion. It was a calculated double life. Tonight, the house of cards she'd built would collapse. With a practiced ease, David moved through the room, exchanging pleasantries and small talk with attendees who greeted him warmly. Inwardly, he marveled at the irony. Everyone here believed they were witnessing the picture of marital success, a couple who supported and elevated each other. They didn't see the lies hidden beneath the surface. Laura was in her element, glowing in a midnight blue dress as she entertained the guests. Chris stood a few feet away, holding court with a small group, his confident smirk as infuriating as ever. David's stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain steady. Emotion had no place here. Not yet. When Laura spotted him across the room, she glided over, her smile radiant. "You're doing your usual wallflower routine," she teased, slipping her arm through his. David met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Just taking it all in." Laura laughed lightly, oblivious to the weight of his words. "Well, don't take too long. Everyone's here to celebrate us." David nodded. "Oh, I think they'll have plenty to celebrate tonight." Laura's brow furrowed slightly, but she dismissed it, as she was called away by another group of guests. David watched her leave, then turned his attention to Emma, who was waiting near the makeshift stage at the front of the room. His sister gave him a small nod, her hand resting on a laptop. It was time. As the crowd began to settle, Laura took the microphone, her voice cheerful as she thanked everyone for coming. She spoke about their shared dreams, their hard work, and their journey as a couple. David listened, his face calm, but his mind racing. Every word felt like a mockery of the truth. When Laura handed the microphone to him, David stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He looked out at the sea of familiar faces, his heart pounding, but his resolve firm. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "It means a lot to Laura and me to have your support. I wanted to take this opportunity to share something important with all of you, a glimpse into the real story behind the life we've built together." He gestured to Emma, who clicked a button on her laptop. The room's projector came to life, casting a series of images onto the large screen behind him. At first, there were murmurs of confusion. Photos of Laura and Chris laughing at the bar, holding hands, and leaving together. Laura's smile froze. Her eyes darted to the screen, then to David, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. Laura's words drifted out, and David's phrase sat there alone. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low but urgent. David ignored her, his voice carrying over the crowd. "For months, I've been unraveling a story of deceit. While I was working to support our life together, Laura was creating a life of her own, with Chris." Gasps rippled through the room as the photos continued to cycle. Text messages appeared next, screenshots of Laura's exchanges with Chris. Each line exposed their secret meetings, their plans, their shared disdain for the man standing before them. Chris tried to step forward, his face pale. "David, this isn't the time." "Oh, but it is," David interrupted, his tone sharp. "You've both had plenty of time. Now it's my turn." He turned to the crowd, his composure unbroken. "I didn't come to this lightly. I've spent weeks gathering evidence, verifying every detail. I wanted to ensure there was no doubt about the truth." The room was silent, save for the occasional whispered exchange. David took a breath, his gaze steady as he continued. "This isn't just about me. It's about honesty, respect, and the sanctity of commitments. Laura and Chris chose to betray those values, not just in private, but at the expense of everyone who trusted them. Tonight, I'm reclaiming my life from the lies they've spun." Laura finally found her voice. her words a mix of desperation and anger. "David, stop this. We can talk about this privately." David's laugh was cold. "Privately? Like the private moments you shared with Chris?" "No, Laura. Privacy isn't a privilege you get to demand anymore." As the final images faded from the screen, David turned to the audience. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I didn't plan for this to be a celebration, but perhaps in a way it still is, because tonight I'm choosing freedom. I'm choosing honesty, and I'm choosing to move forward without the weight of betrayal." He handed the microphone back to Laura, who stood frozen, her face a mixture of shock and humiliation. Chris had disappeared into the crowd, his bravado shattered. David walked off the stage, Emma meeting him with a reassuring hand on his shoulder. As he exited the room, the applause that followed wasn't for Laura or her charade. It was for the man who had finally exposed the truth. Outside, the cool night air felt like a balm against David's skin. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity. The life he had built with Laura was over, but what lay ahead was entirely his to shape. The morning after the revelation, David sat at the dining table in his quiet home, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. The house felt different now, its silence no longer heavy with suspicion and dread. It was a clean slate, though the wounds of the previous night were still raw. Laura had called him several times after the event, leaving frantic voicemails that alternated between anger and sorrow. He hadn't answered. The clarity he sought for so long had been achieved, and there was nothing left to discuss. The truth was out in the open. And now it was time to begin rebuilding. Not their marriage, but himself. The first step was practical. David had already filed for divorce, his attorney assuring him the evidence he presented would simplify the process. The financial documents he had gathered over weeks, detailing questionable spending and deceit, ensured Laura wouldn't walk away with an unfair share. As much as he wanted to leave everything behind, he had to protect his future. That afternoon, he met with Sophia, Laura's boss. The meeting wasn't about revenge. It was about setting boundaries. "David," Sophia said, her expression somber, "I can't tell you how sorry I am. I had no idea." This was entirely too much. David nodded. "I'm not here to ask for action against her. That's not my place. But I thought you should know what's been happening. If it spills into her work, you'll have the context." Sophia appreciated his professionalism, and the conversation ended amicably. As he walked out of the office building, David felt lighter. He had always been a man of fairness, and staying true to that principle reassured him that he hadn't let the betrayal poison his character. Later, he visited Emma, his sister and confidant through the ordeal. She greeted him with a warm hug, her kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of baking. Over slices of fresh bread, they reflected on the previous night. "You handled it better than I would have," Emma said, shaking her head. "I'd have thrown something at her." David chuckled, though his heart still ached. "I wanted to, but I knew that would only make things worse." "You deserved better, David," she said, her voice soft. "You know that, right?" He nodded, though the weight of her words lingered. Did he deserve better? He thought back to the years he spent trying to make their marriage work, the times he overlooked small betrayals of trust because he wanted to believe in Laura. In the end, it hadn't been enough. But now he had the chance to rediscover himself, to build something stronger. The days turned into weeks, and life began to shift. David found solace in routines he hadn't realized he missed. Early morning runs, evenings spent reading, and reconnecting with old friends. People who had seen the revelation unfold reached out, offering support and even admiration for the dignity he displayed in such a painful moment. One weekend, he joined Emma and her children for a day at the park. Watching his niece and nephew play, their laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air, reminded him of the joy that still existed in the world. It was a balm, a reminder that life moved forward even after heartbreak. Chris, unsurprisingly, had disappeared from Laura's life soon after the fallout. Mutual friends told David that the man's confidence had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Laura, on the other hand, had retreated from social circles, her once vibrant presence now subdued. He felt no satisfaction in her misery, only a sense of closure. The final piece of David's healing came in the form of his passion for woodworking, a hobby he had long neglected. He turned the garage into a workshop, spending hours crafting tables and chairs, losing himself in the rhythmic hum of saws and the grain of the wood. Each piece he completed felt like a small victory, a testament to his ability to create something solid and enduring. One evening, as he admired his latest creation, a simple yet elegant coffee table, he realized he was ready to move forward. The wounds Laura left behind hadn't disappeared, but they had started to scar over, leaving him stronger and more self-assured. He made a promise to himself that night, to never again let his life be defined by someone else's choices. Betrayal had taught him a painful lesson, but it had also shown him his own resilience. He had faced the storm and come out on the other side, battered but unbroken. As David stood at the window, watching the sun set behind the distant hills, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The horizon stretched out before him, vast and full of possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt truly free.